It's the fall of '83, and today is not your ordinary day. It's the first Scholastic Book Fair of the year. You're not a big reader, but somehow the arrival of books to acquire always sets off an excitement within you. Maybe it's simply the chance to spend the dollars and quarters in the envelope mom gave you. Perhaps it's the 15 minutes out of class you get to peruse the stocked folding tables in the hall. But it's more than that. One table has students jockeying for position, trying to glimpse what's to come when their turn arrives. Everyone, especially you, knows why. Your elation mixes with worry as more and more books are ferried away. They've brought enough for everyone, haven't they? You can't go back to class without one. Your moment arrives. You plant your feet. The cave of time. The race forever. Who killed Harlow Thrumbey? Which one? A minute ago you would have been happy to take any one of them, but now it all hinges on this moment. You can feel the side eye from the girl to your left as the pressure mounts. Come on. Come on. It's just a book, but you know better than that. Come on. Now or never. How will you choose? Welcome back to another 80s podcast. I'm your host, Whit, and I really appreciate you joining me. And today I'm going solo. That's right, no guest. Just me all by my lonesome. Okay. Take it easy. You got this. It's your ship now. You're the top dog. The big man. Numero uno honcho. The head cheese. Anyone? Anyone? Airplane 2, the sequel? Shatner? Probably reached on that one. I've really been looking forward to this episode as our topic is choose your own adventure books. They were a pretty huge deal back in the 80s and they had a significant impact on me and countless others. Choose your own adventure books are what were considered game books or interactive books. We're going to talk some of the history and as always try to recreate some of that magic. And as we rewind, we're going to find that choose your own adventure books weren't the only game in town. Like so many things we've lived through that we find awesome, it's difficult to manufacture years later how special the time was. However, if you think numbers tell the story, there were 250 million choose your own adventure books sold between 1979 and 1999. No Amazon, no thrift books online. That's a lot of books sold at the book fair, your local bookstore, B. Dalton, Walden, wherever. For those new to choose your own adventure books, we should probably give a quick breakdown of what they were. It's been decades since I read one of these, so I bought a bunch of original and newer versions to get a refresher. The books were similar physical size to a novel, none of those super wide children's looking books that were pretty common at the time. The average book was about 100 to 120 pages long, very digestible, especially for elementary and middle school kids. Each book began with a warning communicating what I'll call the guidelines for how the adventure should be read. We'll go into more detail about the warnings later as they did change over time. Choose your own adventure books were written in the second person, so you were you. Your character usually didn't have a name. This was intentional as to engross the reader into the role. It was your story and your story alone. Later choose your own adventure books would often give the protagonist a name though. Frequently throughout the book, you find choices that would propel you to different pages of the book. Depending on those decisions, you would achieve glory or meet an untimely demise. Now that we got the basics, let's talk a little bit about the creators and the history. The first Choose Your Own Adventure was published in 1979. However, it wasn't the first book of its kind. Let's talk about a few. What is often regarded as the first game book is the book named Consider the Consequences, which was written by Doris Webster and Mary Alden Hopkins and published in 1930. It was a romantic novel that had 43 different endings where the reader had to make choices directing the story. The 1940s brought us Garden of Forking Paths by Jorge Luis Borges. It's a story about a novelist who finds himself lost in a garden maze. Depending on the path laid, different storylines and endings appeared. This was followed a few decades later by Lucky Les, which was written by E.W. Hildick in either 1967 or 1974, depending on the source. I couldn't really figure it out. It's the story of Les the cat going on adventures, but not your ordinary cat adventures of where to nap or begging for treats. Les encountered pirates, sharks, and even cannibals. It included different endings where the reader directed the story. For instance, should Les the cat attend school at Dr. Scratch's or Miss Tabb's Academy? It was all up to you. There were others as well, but I think we have the gist here. Which leads us to Edward Packard, the modern originator of what would become the Choose Your Own Adventure book. Born in 1931, Packard was a Princeton and Columbia Law School graduate who worked as a lawyer before becoming a full-time writer. One of his favorite things was reading bedtime stories for his daughters, and it was here where the genesis of the Choose Your Own Adventure would come to be. Packard often told adventure stories, as his favorite books growing up were Treasure Island and Gulliver's Travels. A common story he would tell was about a child shipwrecked on Sugar Cane Island, from his own imagination. Packard would mix up different versions of the adventure to keep it more interesting for his kids. On one night, he ran out of ideas and didn't know what direction to take the story. Instead of ending the story abruptly, he asked his daughters what they would do and where the story should go. Should the child climb a hill or walk along the beach? His kids loved it. Later in interviews, the self-deprecating Packard would say if he had been a better writer, Choose Your Own Adventure books would never have been created. The seed had been planted. While still practicing law, Packard spent his commutes thinking about how this could actually be turned into a book. He even put together flowcharts mapping possible outcomes for a story, fine-tuning his project as much as possible. Packard had to make this a reality. Unfortunately, like so many endeavors, the road would be a windy one. Packard finished his manuscript in 1969 and put it in front of as many major publishers as he could. One by one, they passed on it. There just wasn't a there. Dismayed, Packard put the manuscript away, not knowing whether his idea would ever become a reality. That would change about 5 or 6 years later during a ski trip in Vermont. While reading a newspaper, Packard saw that a small publishing company by the name of Vermont Crossroads Press was looking for innovative children's books. The spark was reignited, and he sent them a copy of his manuscript. The owners of the publishing company, R.A. Montgomery and his then wife, Constance Capel, loved it and published it in 1976. The book was named Sugar Cane Island, heard that before, and was the first book published in the Choose Your Own Adventure style we would all come to know and love. As we're going to see, R.A. Montgomery wasn't just a publisher. He was also a writer who lived a very different life than Packard to this point. Montgomery very much considered himself an adventurer, being an avid mountain climber, skier, and scuba diver. This can be seen in the books he would later pen. More important than his writing, he partnered with Packard to push Choose Your Own Adventure books to the forefront of children's literature. Being a smaller publisher, the first book had modest sales. Montgomery, believing this could be a game changer if handled properly, visited schools and surveyed students about the books. What did they like? What didn't they like? Overwhelmingly, the reviews were positive. Still, Packard had worries that a small publisher wouldn't be able to propel the idea to the heights he imagined. With that in mind, he had 2 similar style books published with Lippincott, which was a significantly larger publisher. Montgomery published a game book of his own in Journey Under the Sea, which would later be republished with Choose Your Own Adventure. If you think writing competing game books right at the dawn of what would be Choose Your Own Adventures is a little bit odd, we are going to find out a little bit later how the relationship between Packard and Montgomery was a bit fractious. Realizing the potential of this sort of book series, Montgomery and Capel connected with publisher Bantam, who I'm pretty sure everybody has heard of. Bantam jumped on the concept, seeing its potential, and Packard was brought on as a writer. The first official Choose Your Own Adventure book published was Cave of Time in 1979. Written by Packard, it was actually inspired by his daughter Andrea. He had come up with stories having to do with a time machine when she suggested replacing the machine with not a TARDIS, not a DeLorean, but a temporal displacing cave. Or for you non-nerds, or people who started dating way earlier than I did, a time-traveling cave. This was quickly followed by such classics as By Balloon in the Sahara, Space and Beyond, The Mystery of Chimney Rock, and Your Code Name is Jonah. Packard or Montgomery wrote all these books except for one. In fact, of the first 20 Choose Your Own Adventure books written, the two combined for 18 of them, with Packard writing 10 and Montgomery writing 8. And those 18 books were written and published within 4 years of the Cave of Time. Choose Your Own Adventure books had taken off with stores and schools marking them as a great way to get kids reading. Bantam wanted a book published every month, but there was no realistic way that Packard and Montgomery could keep up to that pace. In 1984, additional writers were hired, which more than doubled the output of books. I had trouble sourcing the amount of books sold in the 1980s alone. The closest I came was a reference to a Publishers Weekly article that supposedly indicated that 34 million Choose Your Own Adventure books were sold in North America in the 80s. The reason I say supposedly is because I didn't even find the article. It was another article referencing that article. Now let's take a look at some Choose Your Own Adventure books. Well, I'm going to look while you listen. I've included some images on the Another 80s Facebook page if you'd like to take a gander at the books that I bought for this episode. That's right, I've got a Facebook page specifically for the podcast. Moving on. The sound of pages turning like that is one of those sounds that's just unmistakable, like the sound of a break in a pool game or that plastic bubble to roll dice in the board game Trouble. You know what I mean. As mentioned earlier, the books had the face size of a novel with significantly fewer pages. The covers of the original Choose Your Own Adventure series normally had the title and a tagline at the top and a white border with an illustration located at the center bottom. The image almost looks like a gateway into the story world. The tagline for The Mystery of Chimney Rock was, "You're the hero of the story. Choose from 40 possible endings." Being a darker storyline, it had images of a boy finding a secret hatch, a dangerous-looking groundskeeper, an angry old woman reaching for the young boy with a spooky mansion in the background, and lastly, a large, fanged black cat overarching all of them. This is easily, in my opinion, the most 80s cover of all the Choose Your Own Adventure books I've encountered. Who Killed Harlow Thrombey has a similar cover structure with a boy at center stage with a girl who would be his detective competition. The tools of a detective scattered around, brandy that may be poisoned, a sloppy-looking PI, a pale, crazy-eyed butler, and of course, a dead body. The tagline here was, "You're the detective and this is your first murder case." By the way, if the name Harlow Thrombey sounds familiar to you, it may be because you heard a similar name in the movie Knives Out. The director, Rian Johnson, was paying homage to this book, but with his murder victim Harlan Thrombey rather than Harlow Thrombey. One thing you notice is that most of the covers of the original Choose Your Own Adventure series have boys on the cover. While the story often doesn't indicate you, the main character, are a boy, the cover certainly seems to point the reader in that direction. Apparently, this was a dispute that Packard and Montgomery had with Bantam Publishing. They felt it took away from the you, quote-unquote, in the interactive adventure if boys were being highlighted. Bantam, on the other hand, was worried about book sales, thinking that many boys wouldn't be interested in reading a book where it appeared the main character was a girl. This probably isn't shocking to most people. It was the early 80s. With Bantam's goal of selling as many as they could and even the authors wanting them spread as far as possible, this was most likely the right decision. I don't say this because it was acceptable to favor boys. I say this as a boy who was 9 or 10 at the time. Was I open-minded enough to pick up a book with a female main character? Would I have been brave enough to talk about it at show and tell in front of the whole class? I have a pretty good idea who I was back then, and I would be betting against me. Were the girls in my elementary school less concerned with such issues because they were used to dealing with that favoritism already? Or were they just more secure than a boy like me? Yeah. And the way we know this is that girls bought the books no matter who was on the cover. Open up the book and you'll find quotes from critics. And by that I mean glowing reviews from the ones that matter, the child readers themselves. 10-year-old Sebastian Stanley says, "Sometimes you get attacked by sharks and squid. I went down to Atlantis 5 times. 12-year-old Carrie Romano says, "I like Choose Your Own Adventure books because they're full of surprises. I can't wait to read more." Who needs the New York Times book review? And some of the books have quotes of another key demographic, teachers. We have read and reread, worn thin, loved, loaned, bought for others, and donated to school libraries our Choose Your Own Adventure books. Yeah, get enough kids and teachers to love your children's book series, and you're in a good place. Alright, let's talk about the aforementioned warning at the beginning of the books. In the original series, it read similar to this warning in Mystery of Chimney Rock. Warning, do not read this book straight through from beginning to end. These pages contain many different adventures you can go on in Chimney Rock. From time to time, as you read along, you'll be asked to make a choice. Your choice may lead to success or disaster. The adventures you take are a result of your choice. You're responsible because you choose. After you make your choice, follow the instructions to see what happens to you next. Remember, you cannot go back. Think carefully before you make a move. One mistake may be your last. It may lead you to fame and fortune. Clearly, the original idea of the authors was for the reader to go forward no matter what. And by the way, all that declaring you heard from me reading the warning wasn't voluntary. There are exclamation points all over the place. The reader was being warned. Let the chips fall where they may, but there is no going back. Well, even early in the series, the warning would soften, indicating you could go back, which seems kind of ridiculous anyway, since, well, we were doing that anyway, whether we had permission or not. Later in the episode, we're going to hear about ChooseCo books, which is what Choose Your Own Adventure morphed into later. In the ChooseCo books, 2003 and beyond, the warning read as follows. Beware and warning. This book is different from other books. You and you alone are in charge of what happens in the story. There are dangers, choices, adventures, and consequences. You must use all of your numerous talents and much of your enormous intelligence. The wrong decision could end in disaster, even death. But don't despair. At any time, you can go back and make another choice, alter the path of your story, and change its result. Here you are still made aware that your choices are salient, but they're reversible. I would say this warning was more realistic in terms of what the reader was really going to do, but the tone of the two warnings really is representative of its time. I mean, this warning only had one exclamation point. The original warning had 8. The early 80s warning is hitting you over the head with how it's your choice. Don't make a mistake. Life has consequences, pal. The 2000s warning not only gives you an out, but tries to build you up about how talented and smart you are. It's the equivalent of a 2000s dad telling his 11-year-old son before he walks out to the mound, hey, you got this. It's just a game. Compared to my dad telling me, hey, you better throw strikes or I'm going to have to bring in someone else. Definitely a different feel. One more thing about the warnings of Choose Your Own Adventure books in the 80s. They could also be book specific. I got a great example of that by my friend Dustin, better known by his moniker Magellan. I was telling him that I was doing an episode of Choose Your Own Adventure, and he immediately jumped into his favorite one, Inside UFO 5440. Here's the premise. You're on a flight from New York to London when an alien spaceship, UFO 5440, abducts you. On board, you meet an alien race on a quest to find the utopian planet Ultima. Along with other abducted humans from various time periods and aliens from different galaxies, you must decide whether to join the search for Ultima. What's special about this book is that there is no way to reach Ultima, that utopian planet you're searching for, no matter what choices you make. That's right, you have to cheat and basically flip to page 101 of the book to get to Ultima. How would you know to do that? Well, here's the warning. Warning: do not read this book straight through from beginning to end. These pages contain many different adventures you can have inside UFO 5440. From time to time, as you read along, you'll be asked to make a choice. Your choice may lead to success or disaster. The adventures you have will be the result of the decisions you make. After you make your choice, follow the instructions to see what happens to you next. That's pretty standard fare, unless, of course, the book has a special warning. Special warning. While you're on board UFO 5440, you may hear about Ultima, the planet of paradise, and you may wonder if one of your adventures will lead you there. Sad to say, many never reach Ultima because no one can get there by making choices or following instructions. There is a way to reach Ultima. Maybe you'll find it. That was the hint that playing by the rules wasn't going to work. I read a bunch of reviews where plenty of people loved the diversion from the usual Choose Your Own Adventure formula, and there were plenty others who, 40 years later, seemed to be just as annoyed about their choices not mattering when they read it. Quick segue here. This is a pretty good example of what I'm looking for with this podcast. I mentioned a topic to someone and they took it from there, showing their perspective and wonder. I live for that stuff. So thanks to Magellan for the info and letting me listen to his Choose Your Own Adventure story. I really had forgotten how Choose Your Own Adventure books of the 80s jumped very quickly into the plot. There wasn't much of an exposition. For instance, in Mystery of Chimney Rock, you're visiting your cousins who happen to live nearby a spooky old mansion that may be cursed. That's what you learn on the first page. In The Lost Jewels of Nabooti, you get an urgent telegram from your cousins. Weird that the second book I rebought's mystery also stems from cousins. Let's move on. The message on the first page reads, in caps, "Need your help finding the jewels of Nabooti. Fly to Boston at once. Bring passport. Danger. Be careful. Peter and Lucy." In Who Killed Harlow Thrombey, you helped the police capture a robber who stole a pearl necklace from your aunt. After procuring a magnifying glass, fingerprint kit, and a cassette recorder, you're ready for business, quote unquote. A paragraph later, your first client, Harlow Thrombey, arrives at the door. And we're off. Let's face it, we weren't looking for Act 1. We just wanted to jump in the pool. After a few pages, you would come to a passage where the book comes alive and you get to choose. Take one of the early choices in The Mystery of Chimney Rock. Your cousins Jane and Michael have taken you to the creepy mansion. Jane has gone in the house, but it's been about 6 or 7 minutes and she hasn't come back. Per the book, you exchange worried glances with Michael. "I guess we better go in after her," you say. "I'm going to get help," Michael replies. "You stand watch." Before he can answer, he goes running off toward the road. Then you get to the reason it all matters, the choosing. If you go inside after Jane right away, turn to page 12. If you wait for Michael to get help, turn to page 11. Choose Your Own Adventure books truly did allow the reader more agency than anything that came before. It was brand new, and with that came excitement and responsibility. One of the amazing things about these books is that it wasn't solely about the decisions the book laid in front of you. You had to decide which you were going to be. At least I did. Would I be Bastian or Atreyu? Would I be cautious or brave? I never met an ending, went back for my second life, and was the same you as I was before. It was like a video game, and it wasn't. I knew it wasn't real and there was no real consequence, but I also knew that ending up dead wasn't going to get Jane out of Chimney Rock. For those of us understanding my never-ending story references, I started off most Choose Your Own Adventures like Bastian, unsure, safe, following whatever rules I would most likely have followed in real life. It was probably the closest version of the real me. The more mistakes, the more restarts, the closer to Atreyu I became, bolder and much more willing to risk it all to get to the goal. I've often wondered what the experience of other Choose Your Own Adventure readers were in terms of the second person. I don't know if my mind's eye was truly able to capture that the main character in the book was you, aka me. My perception was that I was flip-flopping between being the main character and just making decisions for the main character. The closer to danger, the more I was the main character. I would be curious to hear if other people were able to just pick up the book and be fully transported in the role. Feel free to go to the Facebook page and make some comments about that. I would love to hear about it. What's the point of doing a podcast episode about Choose Your Own Adventure books unless you actually read from one of those actual books? So before I actually recorded this episode, while I was doing some of the reading of the books after I got them, I decided to record myself a little bit to see if I could find some of that danger and excitement and to see how I do 40 years later. So here we go. All right, hopefully I've set this up pretty well in the podcast. I've been reading through the Mystery of Chimney Rock, trying to find a spot where either hopefully I come to a success or maybe even come to a poor ending. Found a couple earlier, but they're really just decisions that led to other decisions. I think I may have come across one here where we come to some sort of result. So here we go. You run quickly through the dining room, through the large musty library, and onto the huge living room hall. Suddenly you hear a noise from the dining room. You race up the main staircase and stand in the upstairs hall, listening. Thump, thump, thump. You hear footsteps following you up the stairs. Yet when you look toward the stairs, there is no one there. Now you're aware of the thumping of your heart. Perhaps that's what you heard. Or was it something else? The ghost of Mr. Bigley? But of course ghosts do not exist. Then you hear the thumping sound again, this time from down the hall. Across the hall you notice a large cedar closet. Further down you see a door slowly opening. Okay, choosing time. If you duck into the cedar closet and observe from there, turn to page 90. If you walk up to the opening door, turn to page 91. This seems vaguely familiar. Yeah. It's funny. I'm not a kid anymore and I still want to do the right thing here. I'm probably choosing the same thing I would have chosen whenever I read this originally, but I'm going to duck into the cedar closet. Okay, go to page 90. Here we are. You step into the cedar closet and swing the door half shut so that you can watch through the crack between the hinges. The other door slowly opens as if someone has come out. You see no one, but you feel a strong draft of air. The door to your closet slams shut. You try to open it, but you are locked in. You yell for help, but beyond the double thick walls of the cedar closet, your voice sounds like nothing more than the moaning of the wind. It is a big closet, with enough air to last you 2 or 3 hours. The end. Yep, that seems about right. I guess the apple does not fall far. That's not how that saying goes. Unless I'm the apple now and I used to be the tree. Okay, let's not use that one.
And now back to your regularly scheduled program.
Well, guess what, a-hole? We're using that one. In fact, there was 0% chance we weren't using that one. Let's get back to it. So after reading a good amount of these, I was a bit surprised by how fast and furious the choices come. It was probably every 2 to 3 pages where the reader had to make a choice. I thought they were spread out a bit more. That just didn't fit my memory warehouse. Even with any imagination limitations I had, I really did look at choose your own adventure books differently. That was the brilliance behind the series. It's not like there was a drought of books for kids to read at the time. Plenty of kids found time for Encyclopedia Brown or a plethora of options from Judy Blume. There was plenty of characters I could read about, but Choose Your Own Adventures were the only books that asked, who do you want to be today? As with all successes, there are imitators. Choose Your Own Adventure was no different. Book series such as Which Way Books and Twist a Plot would follow suit. None of them would meet the same success, though. Interesting fact, R.L. Stine wrote 4 Twist a Plot books well before he started Fear Street, followed by Goosebumps. There were also the Follow Your Heart romance books that offered choose your own adventure freedom along with multiple endings. Think Sweet Valley High for game books with entries such as Somewhere in the Sun and Boys, Boys, Boys. Even sports got in the mix with Play It Your Way sports game books. Titles like You Can Win the Pennant and Pro Football Showdown allowed the reader to choose his or her way to victory. Now, I have to admit, I did have a favorite game book competitor to the Choose Your Own Adventure series. TSR, which was behind most of anything Dungeons & Dragons like in the 70s and 80s, came out with the Endless Quest series. They released 36 books between 1982 and 87, with the majority being Dungeons & Dragons fantasy-based stories. Some of the titles include Dungeon of Dread, Pillars of Pentargon, and my favorite, Mountain of Mirrors. There was even some sci-fi mixed in from time to time. A few books included samurai, knights, and even Tarzan. Just like Choose Your Own Adventure, the books were written in second person with the reader making choices directing the main character. There were some differences though. Unlike Choose Your Own Adventure books, your character was often given a name. Mountain of Mirrors begins with, in Mountain of Mirrors, you are an elf named Landon. You are 5 feet 5 inches tall. Although slender, you are very strong and quick on your feet. You are about 270 years old. Since elves live to be about 1,200 years old, you are still in your early teens and human years. Your hair is a dark chestnut brown and hangs straight to your shoulders. Your eyes are emerald green. Like all elves, you have elven sight, allowing you to see objects in the dark by the heat they give off. You speak a number of languages, including those of orcs, goblins, ogres, and halflings, as well as the common language of humans. So yeah, you're kind of you in that you still get to do the decision making, but it's closer to just playing a character like in a video game or actual Dungeons & Dragons. This makes sense to some degree since, unlike Choose Your Own Adventure books, you're not just a 12-year-old having a normal day until something bizarre happens. You're immediately in a fantasy world with no grounding to who you actually are. To be clear, some Choose Your Own Adventure books did provide more background when necessary. For instance, in Deadwood City, you are a cowhand, quote-unquote, riding along a desert trail humming a tune. You've been bored with previous jobs and are looking for a change. I believe that these disparities somewhat changed the decisions I made when reading these books. I've never been an elf or a cowhand, at least not in this life, so when surrounded by ogres on a snow-covered hill in Mountain of Mirrors, it wasn't just what would I do, it was also, well, what would an elf do? This elf in particular. Same for the Choose Your Own Adventure Deadwood City. I know nothing about horses or what it takes to ride the range, but it appeared I was supposed to. The more information I had, the more I was less like me, I think. That's not positive or negative as far as I can tell. I had fun reading these either way. I just wonder if others felt similarly. One other difference worth mentioning quickly. I know we already talked about how fast and furious the choices in Choose Your Own Adventure books could come. The Endless Quest books spaced out the decision making a bit better in my opinion. It wasn't unusual to go 5 to 7 pages of a story before being called on to select a path. I like this pace a bit better since it allowed me to get more engrossed in the story. Ultimately, while there were competitors who tried to replicate and maybe even made some improvements to the game book, Choose Your Own Adventure were the gold standard of the 80s game books. And it wasn't just the volume of books they produced. Like I said earlier, there were plenty of other publishers pushing their game book series. One of the other great attributes of Choose Your Own Adventure was that they touched on so many different genres. Murder mystery, fantasy, sci-fi, suspense, you name it. They had a book that worked as an intro into that genre. And it worked beyond the 80s, unlike other series. You may actually be surprised to know that the series was still running strong in the 90s. I was. They had even gotten licensing to do Star Wars and Disney books. But by 1990, I was 16 and was well beyond the reading level and story interest of Choose Your Own Adventure books. Like most newly licensed teenage boys seeking fresh literary lenses to see the world, I, of course, was mostly reading comic books. While Choose Your Own Adventure books certainly didn't just evaporate in the 90s, the landscape was changing. This isn't unusual, as no one person or product stays on top forever. This was especially true for game books, as games, especially video games, became more and more immersive. In 80s, Atari, Intellivision, or Nintendo relied heavily on gameplay for the most part. Storylines were basic at best, and so often progressed by defeating a level boss or scoring a certain threshold to move on. Now, computer games certainly did better in this regard. I would even argue that the early 80s had some great text computer games. If you know the words, you were standing in an open field west of a White House with a boarded front door. There was a small mailbox here. Opening the small mailbox reveals a leaflet. Then you are familiar with the computer game Zork, which is as close to a Choose Your Own Adventure as possible in my mind. But by the late 80s and 90s, games like Legend of Zelda, a bit basic, and King's Quest really upped the ante on games with storylines. With greater computing power and game bits came larger worlds that captured imaginations in a different way. The Choose Your Own Adventure series was discontinued in 1999. It was only a few years later when R.A. Montgomery bought the rights to the series under a new company named ChooseCo. New books were published and even online adventures were created. More importantly, to me at least, is that they published classic books with some variations. The cars on the cover of the Race Forever look like they're out of Tokyo Drift. Some of the stories have been updated for more modern readers, mentioning digital cameras or more recent models of cars. The illustrations inside the books have also been updated. As one may imagine, my preference is to buy the original books, especially if you want any written by Packard. That's right, ChooseCo doesn't offer any classic books written by the original creator, Edward Packard. Earlier I touched on how Montgomery and Packard weren't the best of buds or even business partners, apparently. And ChooseCo bears witness to that with their History of Game Books section and Choose Your Own Adventure timeline at the end of their classic books. The Game Books section gives a little history of game books, citing The Garden of Forking Paths and another children's book series called Trackers. Then it states, quote unquote, in 1976, R.A. Montgomery wrote and published the first interactive book for young adults, Journey Under the Sea, under the series name The Adventures of You. Now, I'm not saying that Montgomery didn't have a game book story in him or they didn't already have a manuscript of his own before Packard came along with Sugarcane Island, which was released by Montgomery's publishing company. Maybe he did, but there is no mention of Packard in the game books portion at all, even though it discusses the literary movement known as Choose Your Own Adventure. Stranger still is the Choose Your Own Adventure timeline where, you guessed it, Packard just doesn't exist. The timeline even highlights how the first 14 titles of the series reached 10 million books sold in 1983. Packard wrote the first book and 8 total of those 14 books. Look, I'm not a Packard groupie and I really don't have a dog in this fight, but this just seems bizarre. It really is unfathomable that Packard doesn't get a mention in a timeline discussing the series he at least co-created. I used the word fractious earlier, but that really seems to be underselling the relationship of these two. I feel like I read a decent amount about Packard and Montgomery, but maybe I'm just missing the details of the hatchet that doesn't seem to ever have been buried. If someone knows, comment or message me on another 80s Podcast Facebook page. I keep on plugging it, I know. Or my accompanying Gmail, because I would love to know what the real problem was between these two, because I did not see it. We now come to the question I would normally ask a guest. Instead, I only have myself to ask. Why do Choose Your Own Adventure books matter? The intro to the episode was kind of foreshadowing my answer. I wasn't a big reader as a kid. I'd struggle with the summer reading list while other kids seemed to just breeze through it. It was frustrating watching some of my peers just gobble up books like I did movies. I just couldn't find a way to enjoy it. Not with the help of teachers, not with the direction of my parents. And then came Choose Your Own Adventure, and I suddenly could. To be clear, there was no transition to a bookworm. I wasn't doing away with the A-Team to snuggle up with my favorite hardback. Yet, for the first time that I can remember, reading could be fun. I was just one in a sea of kids experiencing this sort of feeling, this sort of magic. The importance of that is just immeasurable, and we have Choose Your Own Adventure books to thank for that. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Another 80s Podcast. I highly recommend you don't just take this trip down Choose Your Own Adventure memory lane from the podcast alone. Go ahead and get a classic Choose Your Own Adventure book at your local used bookstore or thriftbooks.com. They're like $7 or less, and you'll thank me later. If you're any bit curious, the original title for this project was going to be Listen to Wit Slowly Learn How to Work Sound on a Podcast. I'm telling you, it's completely different recording when you don't have a guest. I heard every breath I took and had to try to de-amplify it. The good news is that I'm learning and I've procured a mic that will take care of that pesky noise. Thanks for your patience as I go through the motions. As always, thanks to Full Boy Media who produced the music to Another 80s Podcast. I hope to catch you on the next episode where we move to one of the most entertaining murder mysteries of all time. And just like Choose Your Own Adventure, it wasn't afraid of multiple endings either. The 1985 classic Clue. I'll be back to having a guest and my good friend Fran, who is quite a fan of the film. We'll be talking about all the aspects that made Clue such an 80s staple. I hope to catch you then. Thanks for rewinding with me.